Hi, I'm Maribeth Ditmars. I'm an author, a speaker, and a blogger.
And I'm Janalee-Tomaseki-Heinmann. I'm a social worker and an author and a speaker. We've teamed up together to provide important resources for your community. Maribeth, tell us a little bit about yourself.
As I mentioned, I'm an author, a blogger, a speaker, but more importantly, I'm a mom and a grandma. I have a background in education, and I spent more than 30 years teaching school in Sarasota, Florida, enjoying interacting with bright young minds. Our world was rocked, though, in 1997 when our 10-year-old son, Chris, was diagnosed with leukemia. He lost his battle at the age of 14, but during his treatment, I kept an extensive journal, and this eventually became my first book, Christopher's Journey, A Remarkable Young Man's Struggle with Leukemia. And before Chris passed, he did leave us with a powerful message of love and hope, and I write about that in the book as well.
So your son, Chris, inspired your writing your first book, but I understand you wrote a second book for children.
I did. Chris was a 10-year-old when he was diagnosed, and shortly after his passing, I also had a student in my fourth grade classroom who was diagnosed with cancer. So I was inspired in Chris's memory to write this book, The Bald-Headed Princess, Cancer, Chemo, and Courage. And this is a middle reader chapter book that tells an engaging story about a young lady battling cancer and all that she has to deal with. And it also explains the medical terminology in children's terms. And you know what was a real blessing about this book was that I got to share it with my class and with the student who had cancer. And together we learned about courage, we learned science and cells, but most importantly, we learned about empathy and kindness.
That must have been a powerful experience for you and the children. But I know that you have had more tragedy in your life as well. Chris isn't your only son who died. Can you tell us a little bit about that and how it impacted you?
Well, it rocked our family's world once again. And of course, no mother ever expects to outlive one of her children, let alone two. In 2015, we lost our bright, funny son, Jared. He was only 21. We lost him in an accident. I left full-time teaching and I devoted myself to writing and blogging. And I now have a new book out. It's called Dancing in the Minefields, One Woman's Faith Journey Through Child Loss, Addiction, and Adversity. And in the book, I ask all those hard questions like, God, why? So it's a very powerful book, not only for people who have experienced loss, but people who've had their faith rocked as well. So you can see, without intending to, I've become quite the expert in grief and adversity, and I especially have a passion for helping children and their families. And Janalee, I know that you share my passion for helping others navigate grief and adversity as well. Could you tell everyone how you initially got involved with loss and grief?
Well, from 1985 to 1995, I worked, laughed, and cried with over 100 children who died of cancer when I was working at St. Louis Children's Hospital as a social worker with the pediatric oncology unit. I started a bereavement program for the parents during that time.
So tell me, Janalee, how did you go from being social worker to international speaker?
Well, my husband and I moved to Sarasota, Florida 25 years ago after our 5 children were grown, and I became the executive director for the National Prader-Willi Syndrome Association, and eventually the international vice president for the syndrome. This took me to many countries around the world where I spoke not only to medical professionals, but to parents. during that time. We have a son, Matt, who has the syndrome, who's doing well at this point.
Mm.
But among other programs I started was a bereavement program for the parents whose children died of the syndrome.
Wow, that's impressive, Janalee. So tell us, when did grief become really personal for you?
Well, it started pretty early in life. When I was 22, my dad died suddenly of a heart attack. We were 5 children, and my mom was left with 3 young children still at home, school aged, to
Wow.
raise. Also, then in 2004, our 18-year-old grandson, Adam, died suddenly in an accident. He was our daughter Tracy's only child. So our grief was not only for herself, but certainly for Tracy. During this time, then, I also volunteered for 14 years with the local homicide bereavement support group. And this was part of the Victims Assistance Program. Then in 2018, when I was writing my book, Remember Me, a memoir of children and teens combating cancer, our own son, Tad Tomaseki, was diagnosed with cancer. Tad had thousands of Facebook followers throughout his 2.5 years of battling cancer. Of April of this year, he lost his battle to cancer, but he never lost his positive spirit. Tad's included in my book.
Wow. So Janalee, you actually lost your son Tad while you were writing this book. I'm sure he must be so proud of you.
The last thing Tad said to me 2 days before he died was not only that he loved me, but that I was his hero.
Oh.
But now, Tad was the type of person to give everyone more credit than they really deserve, including me. But really, he was my hero, just as Chris was your hero, Maribeth.
Yeah.
Like it or not, we have an expertise in loss and grief far beyond what any textbook can teach a person.
Yeah, that's so true. And we also have a purpose. And that's why we're talking to you out there today. We've decided to put our passion for helping others with grief and adversity and team up, and we have produced a series of presentations, and we've put together topics that we believe will not only support families who are suffering, but also those who care for them and the professionals who work with them. Janalee, why don't we share some of our topics?
Sure, the following are some of the topics for which we're available to present. The first is What Now? Coping After the Loss of a Child, which is our personal stories of loss and its impact on our families, and it has practical coping strategies. The next is We Walk with Angels, which is true stories of hope, courage, and faith from terminally ill children, all of whom we personally knew. Another topic is Talking to Children About Death. Loss of a parent, grandparent, or sibling affects children differently than adults. Helpful guidelines for talking to grieving children are included, and for those who are experiencing the loss, and a guidance for the parents working with them and professionals. Grief Complicated by COVID-19. That's understanding the extra layers of complexity grief takes on due to the virus. It helps in dealing with the stress of separation, which is one of the big traumas during a COVID-19 death.
Sure is.
Us versus long-term illness. What makes them different, and practical strategies for coping with each.
And once again, here's another look at my first 2 books, Christopher's Journey, A Remarkable Young Man's Struggle with Leukemia, and The Bald-Headed Princess, Cancer, Chemo, and Courage. And my new book, Dancing in the Minefields, One Woman's Faith Journey Through Child Loss, Addiction, and Adversity. Here's another look at Janalee's wonderful book, Remember Me, a memoir of children and teens combating cancer. And here is our contact information. To order Remember Me, you can go to remembermethebook.com. To order Christopher's Journey, you can go to marybethditmars.com/books. And you can also find all of these books on Amazon as well. Here is Janalee's contact information, jheinmann@pwsausa.org. And here is mine, Maribeth, rditmars@gmail.com, and we'll leave that up for just a moment. And we just have a lot to offer, and we look forward to hearing from you.